Hi, welcome back to my channel. Make sure that you subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified of new uploaded videos. For today in oral communication, we're going to be talking about the models of communication. Okay, I hope everybody knows who this person in the picture is. He is Alexander Graham Bell. He was a Scottish-born inventor. He was a scientist. He was an engineer, and he was the one who was credited for inventing and patenting the first practical telephone. His father-in-law established the Bell Telephone Company, and Claude Shannon and also Warren Weaver, they collaborated to write an article in Bell's System Technical Journal. And the article was entitled A Mathematical Theory of Communication, which is now popularly known as the Shannon-Weaver Model of Communication. So in 1948, Claude Shannon, who was an American mathematician, he was also an electronic engineer, and also Warren Weaver, who was an American scientist, they wrote that article, and the aim was to enable the engineers of Bell Telephone Company to transmit mechanical messages more effectively. The model that they made was specifically designed to develop an effective communication between the sender and the receiver. But they also found some factors that affect the communication process, and then they called it noise. So at first, the model was developed to improve the technical communication, particularly in Bell's telephone company. But later, it was widely applied in the field of communication. Now let's talk about Shannon-Weaver's model of communication. So you can see in here the information source, transmitter, receiver, and reception. Again, this model is specifically designed to develop effective communication between the sender and the receiver. The model presents the sender, which is the information source, as the part of the telephone that a person speaks into. And then the receiver is the part of the telephone where one hears the person speaking. The channel itself is the telephone. Now, sometimes when there are calls made, messages made through the telephone, there is static, or sometimes there is absence of signal. These are considered noise based on Shannon-Weaver's model of communication. So once the source produces a message, say for example, the message will be converted into waves, like when a voice is converted to wave signals, right? And then these waves or wave signals will be transmitted through the cables or probably the satellites. Now, the receiver will then decode those waves or signals and adapts them or for transmission to the receiver. Now, otherwise, if the receiver can't receive the exact message, then it will affect the effective communication between the sender and the receiver. During the process, there may be distraction, right? And there could be like physical noise, like horn sounds, thunder, or probably crowd noise, or encoded signals that may distract in the channel during the transmission process, and it will affect the communication flow from the sender to the receiver. Now, the model clearly deals with external noises only that affects the messages or the transmission of signals from external sources. So if there's any problem that occur in the network which directly affect, say for example, the mobile phone communication, then they will be considered noise. One criticism made against this model of communication is that it is more it does not tell about feedback, right? The receiver also plays the passive part in the communication process as the sender plays the primary role that sends messages. So there is no feedback that is presented in Shannon-Weaver's model of communication. Another thing that you have to remember about this model of communication is that it is a linear or one-way communication model. So, strictly speaking, it encounters some difficulty when we apply it to human communication. But its origin is a model to be applied to telecommunication rather than to interpersonal human communication limits its application because it is linear, it's not a two-way communication. Now let's talk about the second model of communication, which is Schramm's model of communication. This model of communication has its roots from the Shannon-Weaver model itself. Wilbur Schramm proposed this model of communication in 1954, and he said, information is useless until it is carefully put into words and conveyed to others. So encoding plays a very important role because it starts the process of communication by converting the message into content. And then when the message reaches the receiver, the primary responsibility of the receiver is to understand what the speaker want to convey in the message. And unless and until the second party, which is the receiver, is able to understand or decode the information that the sender wants to communicate, then the message is actually of no use. So he said that in this model of communication, encoding and decoding are considered to be two of the most important factors in having effective communication, without which then there could never be like information flow between two individuals. So you can imagine yourself talking to someone, let's say a person in your household, and that person didn't respond or didn't say anything um, in response to what you said. So in that case, is the communication complete? Schramm said no. He believed that communication is actually a two-way process between the first party and the second party. Now moving on to the third model of communication. This is more complicated. This is Berlo's SMCR model of communication. So SMCR stands for source, message, channel, and receiver. Berlo, his name is David Berlo. He set out his theory of communication in 1960, and this is what we call as the SMCR model because of these four components that I mentioned earlier. This model represents the process of and phenomenon of communication. So this theory lays out different components that form the net effect of communication. As you can see, there are other factors that are included in here. Now, television advertising is a one-way, right, linear form of communication. And this is actually a good example of the sender message channel receiver model. This is the most basic form of communication that we engage in today. Let's start with this source, which we can also call as the sender. Of course, source is the origin of the message or the person that is giving the message, right? This sender we still have to consider some factors that are related to the sender. And first is the communication skills, which is a factor that affects the communication process, definitely. If the sender has good communication skills, then the message will be communicated better than if the person is not good, or doesn't have good communication skills. In the same manner, as you can see in here, in the receiver part, you would see that the communication skills also has a relation to the way that the receiver would understand the message, right? If the receiver cannot grasp or understand the message, then the communication will not be effective. So the skills would definitely include skills to speak, to present, read, write, and probably could include, of course, listening. Okay? The second would be attitude. So the attitude of the sender and also the receiver creates the effect of the message. You know, the attitude of a person towards himself or the receiver, or probably the environmental changes, will affect the meaning of the message. We should also consider the knowledge of the sender and the receiver. You know, familiarity with the subject or the topic that they are discussing makes the communicated message more effective or easily understood. Knowledge on the subject matter makes the communicator send the message effectively and makes it easier for the receiver to understand it. The next to consider would be the social systems. That would include the values, the beliefs, rules, or probably religion. These all affect the sender's way of communicating the message, and it creates a difference in how the message is transmitted, right? The place and also the situation is included in this factor of social systems. And finally, we have cultural differences. Definitely, cultural differences make differences in encoding and decoding messages. The next factor is the message. Okay? A message is a substance that is being sent or transmitted from the sender to the receiver. It may be in the form of voice, audio, it could be text, it could be video or other media. Okay? The key factors affecting the messages are content, elements, treatment, structure, and code. Content is the thing that is in the message, the whole message from the beginning up to the end. And elements, it would refer to nonverbal things. It could be gestures, or probably signs or language. So those are the non-verbal things. They're included in elements. Treatment would be the way that the message is conveyed or transmitted to the receiver. The treatment can also has an effect on the feedback of the receiver. And of course, we have the structure. The structure is the way that the message is arranged. Definitely, it has an effect on the effectiveness of the message. And finally, we have the code, which is the form in which the message is sent. Is it in the form of language? Is it in the form of text? Is it in the form of video? So this is what we refer to as the code. Now, for the channel, we have hearing, seeing, touching, smelling, and tasting. It is the medium used to send the messages. In mass communication and other forms of communication, technical machines might be used as a channel, like telephone or internet, like this. These are the most common. But in general communication, the five senses of human being is the channel for communication flow. And it affects the effectiveness of the channel. So again, I think it's understandable, right? For hearing, we receive the message through hearing. For seeing, we perceive through seeing. We can also get non-verbal messages by seeing, right? We can see how the body of the speaker moves. We can see the movement of the eyes. And for touching, many of the non-verbal communication happens from touching, like when you hold hands. Okay. For smelling, we can also collect information through smell. And then for the taste, taste also provides information to be sent as a message. And again, the receiver is the person who gets the message sent in the process, right? So this model, the SMCR model, believes that the thinking pattern and all the other factors mentioned here and here, particularly for the receiver, they must be in sync to that of the sender for the communication to be effective. Probably we could say that for the if the source is speaking in English and then the receiver doesn't understand English, then they might not be in sync, right? So the communication may not be that effective. So the message might not have the same effect as intended if the receiver and the sender are not similar. So the receiver must also have very good listening skills. The receiver must also be able to understand the language that is used by the sender for the communication to be effective. Now, the criticisms to this model of communication is that there is also no concept of feedback. So the effect is not considered. There's also no concept of noise, which was present in Shannon-Weaver model of communication. Those barriers in the communication process. Also, the SMCR model of communication is linear, just like the Shannon-Weaver model of communication. I remember and in here, both of the people must be similar according to all the factors mentioned above when we're talking about, particularly when we're um, considering the sender or the source and also the receiver. They must be similar according to the SMCR model of communication. So again, you have been presented three models of communication. The first one was Shannon-Weaver's model of communication. Second is the Schramm's model of communication. And then the third one is Berlo's SMCR model of communication. They could be linear, could be interactive, or transactional. And thank you for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe.